Welcome to Studies with Stearman. Join us as we look deeper into the Bible. Strengthen your faith with us, even as we see the day approaching. And now, here's Gary.
The only system in existence today, of all the religious and intellectual and philosophical systems, the only one that's capable of changing lives is the walk in the Lord Jesus Christ. All the other systems and religions pretend to be able to change your life. They don't do it at all. Psychology, psychiatry, various forms of Eastern religion, Zen Buddhism, whatever it is. They all pretend to be able to make you a better person, but they don't. Only Christianity is capable of creating a new person. This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their heart. That's the condition of an unsaved individual. Blind. They may be nice. Those next door neighbors who don't know the Lord, they may be the most wonderful people you've ever met. They may be generous and thoughtful and so forth, but they are unregenerate. They are incapable of thinking with the mind of Christ. Paul calls it the vanity of the mind. And if you are like me, the more you read the Bible and the closer you get into what the Bible teaches, the more you look at the thinking that's in the world today. The way the world thinks, the way it thinks in terms of perceptions of our geology, the globe, the climate, the way it perceives the natural world, the trees. People with the mind of the natural man today believe that insects and trees and lower forms of animal life actually devise strategies to perpetuate their own existences. And they've done so for millions of years. They credit little bugs with all kinds of intellectual powers. They worship the landscape. They worship the natural world created by God in its every single detail. Those of us with the mind of Christ realize that's pure foolishness. God created the whole system. He created it to be a blessing to man, and He maintains it. God created the climate, and He maintains it. People trying to scare you to death right now about the climate. God created it, He controls it. End of story. Oh, you could go farther than that. You can read all the scripture about the weather. But it's the vanity of the mind versus the mind of Christ that's being spoken of here. And to go to one of my favorite scriptures back in 1 Corinthians, if you go back and read what Paul says about the mind. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit, for they are foolishness unto him. How often lately have we seen the Bible quoted in a political context, and you just have to laugh at the misunderstanding? But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit. The natural man looking at spiritual things, it makes a fool of himself. They're foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them because they're spiritually discerned. But he that is spiritual judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man. We are judged by Christ, but we're not judged of any other man. Now that'll preach. That's a whole hour right there. For who hath known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. That's a staggering thought, but we do. When you are born again, you have the mind of Christ. Or to put it more succinctly, you have access to the mind of Christ. And as you become spiritually mature over the years, more and more you have the actual mind of Christ. The vanity of the mind, says Paul, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that's in them because of the blindness of their heart. Just one quick statement about that before we move on. The blindness of the heart. How can your heart be blind? Or to ask a more rhetorical question, when the Bible mentions the heart, what's it talking about? Well, the Bible always uses the heart as a symbol of motivation. Where your heart is and your mind is, you move in that direction. If your heart is in something, you move in that direction. If your heart's not in it, you don't. And If you trust in the Lord with all your heart, as is written in Proverbs, that means that you are motivated. You're moved toward God. Well, here, Paul speaks of the blindness of the heart. The unsaved individual, the worldly individual, is simply unmoved toward the things of God, who, being past feeling, have given themselves over unto lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. If you do not have the mind of Christ, there's a part of you that desires to be stimulated, to be moved along, to have in it the passions that make you feel alive, make you feel like you want to move in a particular direction. And if you are not stimulated by the things of God, you're stimulated by the things of the world. That's what Paul refers to as lasciviousness. It's what you get when you look at 80% of the internet or 90% of TV. It's lasciviousness. It's men trying to stimulate themselves so that they feel like they're alive and moving. If you are alive and moving in the Lord, you don't need that stuff. And then, says Paul, in an interesting statement, and this is unique in the Bible, verse 20, Ephesians 4. This is a unique statement in all the Bible. There's nowhere else that uses this expression. Paul says, but ye have not so learned Christ. Now, to learn Christ is never used elsewhere as an expression. In fact, even Paul only uses it this one time. What does it mean to learn Christ? What in the world does it mean to learn Christ? Not learn about Christ, not learn Christ's teachings, not learn what you should do now that you know about Christ, but to learn Christ. There is a unique grammatical construction here that speaks of absorbing the sum of Christ's person and his instruction. To learn Christ in this way literally means to absorb Christ. That's what it means in the Greek. Now, you think about that. I mentioned Zen Buddhism a minute ago. You've all heard of Zen Buddhism. You know, you sit cross-legged and look at a rock or whatever. And if you look at the rock long enough, you begin to absorb rockness. After having absorbed rockness, you might work to absorb treeness by staring at a tree. The whole idea is to bring yourself into oneness with nature. That's Zen Buddhism. To absorb the vast oneness until you become at one with the oneness. You know, beginning to sound like Mr. Spock. But that's not so funny in the biblical context, because that's exactly what Paul is talking about. He's talking about learning Christ, absorbing Christ to the point that the entire sum of his person and his instruction becomes a part of you. Now, if you want to be a Zen Buddhist, that's the way to do it, except at the end of the process, you're not going to be a Buddhist, you're going to be a really complete Christian. And Paul had that in mind when he said, but ye have not so learned Christ. In other words, your understanding is not darkened. You have learned Christ in such a way that there is not a shred of doubt in your entire person about who he is and what he teaches. You'll never get into a debate about, for example, which portions of the Bible are inspired and which portions are not. You'll never get into a debate about the deity of Christ, the origin of Christ, and the mission of Christ. After a while, you get beyond argument. You reach the point that you have learned Christ. And this is the only place in the whole Bible that that idea is put into words. But ye have not so learned Christ, if so be that you've heard him, been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning the former conversation or lifestyle, the old man which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. This idea of putting off the old man, and here we're going to get into a process today. The idea of putting off the old man begins in Romans chapter 6, which we've all studied so many times. Paul starts In Romans chapter 6, verse 1, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. We've read these words hundreds of times. But read on, for if we've been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. The body of sin might be destroyed. It doesn't say has been destroyed, that the body of sin might be destroyed. The idea here is this complex idea that at the moment of salvation, you became a new person. Now, we all know that. But then it's very, very complicated because at the very same moment, an internal war begins, which Paul talks about in Romans 7. He talks about the war between the flesh and the spirit that continues after your salvation. And the process of that war carries you inexorably toward one thing: putting off parts of the old man and putting on parts of the new man in Christ as you are able, as you are gifted, as you are inspired, as you learn Christ. You go through this process of putting off the old and putting on the new. And I think we've all been through this dozens of times. The renewal process is an agonizing process designed by God to be an agonizing process. I have personally agonized over parts of my old person. I find inside of me things that I don't want to see. I really do. I'll just be honest with you. I'm not going to tell you what they are. But I find things in me that I don't like to see there. I find thoughts, I find motivations, I find personal preferences, personal expressions of various kinds, and I'm saying, what's that? When it pops up. I deal with those old things. Guess what? At one point in my Christian walk, I thought, one of these days I'm going to reach a point in spiritual maturity where I won't have to fight those things anymore. I was naive. You fight them all your life. And God arranged it that way because that's the strength of your Christian walk. You are constantly being tested and improved. You're constantly running into parts of the old man that just grieve you to death. You wish that wasn't there. And then you say, okay, Lord, help me with that. And it may take 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades, but eventually you'll deal with that thing and you'll be a stronger person for it. That's the process. Verse 22, that you put off concerning the former lifestyle, the old man, and that you put on the new man. The new man. So, 3 things happen in this process. The word old is the Greek word palaios, which means to be useless, to be worn out, to be decrepit, no longer of any use. It is the depraved nature. The expression to put off is the expression used of taking off clothing or old garments. Who doesn't like new clothes? Listen, have you ever noticed the malls? When you go to a mall, what's in the mall? Like 90% clothing stores. And you say, how can there be this many clothing stores? Why all the clothing stores? I never go to a clothing store. Once every 3 years when I have to, like most guys, I think. But clothing. People love clothing. There's the old expression, clothes make the man. Hey, you go out and get a new set of threads and you are styling. You are looking good. And that's very superficial. But the kind of clothing that the Lord offers is not superficial. You're changing your entire persona. Knowing this, remember what Paul said in Romans? That our old man, that is the person that we were before we were saved, was crucified with him in order that the physical body, which before salvation was dominated by the depraved nature, might be rendered inoperative. That's the whole thing. Now the second point is this. There is a constant process of renewal that began at the baptism of the Spirit, that is, at your salvation point. And this idea of renewal, the Greek word is ananeo, and it means taking not only that which is new, but that which is better. It's more than just a reformation process, it's a rebuilding process, this putting off and putting on. The third idea is that this newness produces a quality. And the quality is of such a nature that it's not entirely understood by human beings. It is the quality of God. And their faith comes into play, because the thing that you're putting on is something you don't quite understand yet. Ananeos. Better, newer, the latest model, whatever you want to call it, and so much better, as we read Paul carefully, that we don't even quite understand what it is that we're doing. Like I've always said, the doctrine of the Lord is, when it's time for you to know, I'll tell you. That's basically the way that the Lord works. But I want to know right now. Well, if I told you right now, you wouldn't understand. That's the basic idea. But I want to know it all right now. Well, you can't know it all right now. This process of putting on the new man is a process that takes a while. This renewal in the spirit of the mind. Now, do you realize, one final word, what Paul was dealing with? Paul was dealing with Greco-Roman intellectualism and philosophy, Gnosticism, which worshiped knowledge. All of the cults and the isms of Paul's day worshiped knowledge. Well, check it out. Today, in the world, we worship knowledge. You really want to interact with the high and the mighty these days, you got to have a degree from Harvard. Why? Because you got connections, interactions. You've got a support group. You've got the whole Harvardian thing. Hey, we're intellectuals. And we intellectuals, we show each other our key or whatever we show each other, and we get into certain doors that we might not be able to get into because we didn't graduate from Harvard. It's that intellectual snobbery. It's the idea that if you cultivate your mind in the right places, why, you can go right to the top and be a big, big, big entity in this world. The same idea exists in Christianity, except it's just the opposite. It doesn't make you a big, big, big person in this world. It makes you a big, big, big person in the next world. Lay up your treasure in heaven. Because you are in the process of being renewed, verse 23, in the spirit of your mind. That is, you are becoming a new person in the image of God. You are going to be resurrected, adopted. Your adoption will be complete at that point, and you will be fit to come into the household of God, having gone through this initial process. And the better you have absorbed it, the better you have learned Christ, the more fit you will be to enter the household of God at the proper time. That's the way it works. And verse 24, that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. For all these reasons, wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. What is truth? Speak every man truth with his neighbor. What is truth? I remember a famous Roman procurator who asked that question once, and he was recorded forevermore in the Bible when he asked that question, what is truth? And he was staring truth right in the face when he asked it. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So here Paul says, wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor. When you speak truth, how do you do that? Do you do it by not lying? This is far more than not lying. When you speak truth, you become like a living epistle. You become a living Christ. If you have so learned Christ, you become to your neighbor a representative of the truth. You become truth. Today, everybody's calling everybody else a liar. Did you ever notice that? How easy it is for people to point the finger at each other in public places, and he's lying, he's a dirty liar. He lied. No, she lied. Well, they both lied. No, we think of truth as the absence of lying. That's not what truth is. Truth is the presence of Christ. Think about it. If Jesus had answered Pontius Pilate truthfully, when Pontius Pilate said, "What's truth?" Jesus would have said, "Well, I am." And what would Pontius Pilate have done? He would have scoffed, turned his back. This guy's crazy. What? Don't cast your pearls before swine. But we know what truth is, for we have learned Christ. In chapters 1 through 3 of Ephesians, Paul presents doctrine. He shows graphically the exalted position to which the believing sinner was lifted through Christ. Chapters 4 through 6, where we are now, he presents an exhortation based on doctrine, and he does it in the realm of sweet reasonableness. I mean, he's not arguing with anybody. He's simply presenting truth. If you can receive it, fine. Back in chapter 4, as we started out a couple of weeks ago, he speaks of the gifted men given to the church by God, whose activities help the body of Christ to live up to these exhortations. In 4:17 through 25, which we're looking at right now, Paul shows the absolutely unbelievable change that's wrought in the believing sinner. In other words, once you have become a believer, this incredible process of change begins in you. You're going places you never thought you'd go before. This idea consists of 3 points. Putting off the old man, number 1. Being renewed in the inner man, number 2. Number 3, putting on the new man. Look where we are now after we put on the new man. We become righteous, we become holy, not just positionally, but practically. We put away lying, and that doesn't just mean telling the truth or avoiding lying, it means living the truth because we have learned Christ. We're called upon to become living truth, and that's an assignment. Think about that. That means wholly integrated. The goal of counseling, no matter what kind of counseling it is to bring an individual to a state of integration so that they are totally unified without inner conflict and turmoil. Integration. The only system that does that completely is Christianity. It brings you kicking and screaming, but you're going to get there. It brings you to a state of integration, personal integration. Jesus is the ultimate example of this. He was the most perfectly integrated, perfectly objective human being who ever walked the face of the earth. Absolutely objective, not swayed or moved by any external ideas. He was truth, and he was perfectly integrated, and he's the model for us. And if you have learned Christ, you've gone through this process of moving from disintegration toward integration, and at last you become well integrated and totally functional, and you become truth. Speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be ye angry and sin not. He dealt with what he called lying, but actually, I've seen it presented another way. Truthing. We don't say truthing. We say lying. He's a liar. He goes around lying a lot. But do you ever refer to anybody as a truther who goes around truthing a lot? No, you don't. But you're supposed to. You are supposed to be a truther. Think about it. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Now, here we get into a standard lecture. Kenneth Wiest and others have commented on the Greek way of referring to anger. There are 3 words for anger in the Greek. One is thumos, which just really sounds kind of mad. Thumos. You know, it sounds hot. And as a matter of fact, that's what it means. It speaks of turbulent, boiling, agitation, passion. It's a hot temper, thumos. Then there is another Greek word for anger, which is parorgismos. Parorgismos. It speaks of irritation, exasperation, embitterment, that's so dirty so-and-so, I'm going to get even who it takes me running. It's that guy drives me right up a wall, I ain't gonna, blah, blah. You ever get to that stage? Sure you do. You've been in an office setting, right? If you've ever sat in an office cubicle, you've experienced parorgismos, because you have to work for an incompetent boss and you have to deal with 18 incompetent dweebs who dwell down the hall someplace. And by the end of the day, you're experiencing parorgismos. It's that irritation, exasperation. Now, I'm going through this because Paul uses all of these words when he talks about anger, and it means something. Finally, there's the third kind of anger, which is orgy, with a hard G, orgy. This is an abiding inner anger that is a settled state of anger. A settled state of anger. Like you're more or less that way all the time, and it may not affect what you do or even sometimes what you think, but it might. It's there to some extent all the time. It's a baseline anger. Paul says, "Be ye angry and sin not." Well, when he says, "Be ye angry and sin not," what's he talking about? He's talking about thumos. And he's talking about parorgismos. And he's saying, "Be ye angry and sin not." And he's talking about, in this one sentence, he summons up various kinds of anger. How can you be angry and sin not? The answer is very simple. Jesus, when he went in, turned over the tables of the money changers, was angry. There's no doubt about it. In fact, he let everybody know how he felt about money changers in the temple. The anger that Jesus had is expressed through this Greek word orgy, which is a settled state. Sometimes we call it righteous indignation. When you see sin going on and you see sinners prospering and you see sin happening within an institution and you watch this and you become angry inside, you say, that's wrong. That should not be. That's okay to be angry that way, to have a state of righteous indignation. And that's exactly what Paul is saying. If you have a settled state, or Paul is saying, have this settled state of righteous indignation inside of you. When you see evil, you should rise up in anger against it. Because God does in the Old Testament, Jesus did in the New Testament. Be angry and sin not. And he uses that term orgy. But then he says, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. It's okay to be in a state of righteous indignation, but you should not be in a state of parorgismos, which is irritation, exasperation that turns to bitterness, that eats away at the inside of you. So he's using here two different terms. A bit later he'll use the third term. What Paul is saying is, you now are truth. If you have so learned Christ, you are representative of truth. It's okay to be in a state of righteous indignation, but it is not okay to allow your anger to create in you a continuous state of exasperation, irritation, and bitterness. That's not good. When he says, don't let sun go down upon your wrath, he's not literally talking about sunset here. After sunset, you shouldn't be angry. He's not talking about that at all. It's a figure of speech in which he is saying, don't allow your anger to lapse into internal embitterment. It's okay to be angry, but it's not good to eat yourself up inside with bitterness. Neither give place to the devil. When Jesus came into the New Testament world that we read about, and he spoke the Beatitudes, it was on the heels of having been tested by the devil. The devil tested him by offering him control of the entire world, which, by the way, was a legitimate offer because he had the world to offer Jesus. Jesus turned it down and chose the difficult path, the tortuous path, the path of personal sacrifice. He did not give place to the devil. very simply, what Jesus did is what we're supposed to do. Because we come to turning points all the time in our life where we're offered the world. Hey, come on over. How would you like to have blah, 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 blah? All you have to do is blah, 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 blah. And you think to yourself, I'd kind of like to have that, but I'll have to do this other thing. Would Jesus have done that? In other words, the world has a way of coming up with offers. Just as the devil came up with offers for Christ, and Christ turned them down and took the way of sacrifice. Essentially, that act is what Paul is referring to here. He says, don't give place to the devil. If the world offers you something that is not right, if the world or a situation pops up and you are really tempted, guess who's operating in that setting? The devil. The devil delights in that sort of thing, and he delights in tempting Christians with really good deals. You've probably been tempted by a few really good deals yourself. And then at some point, a little voice inside said, this deal is too good. On the other hand, by the way, something inside of me is reminding me of a particular scripture. Maybe I'd better not do that. That's what's going on there. We're in a constant state of making wise decisions. And the devil is in a constant state of offering false allure of various kinds. Neither give place to the devil. Let him that stole steal no more. This is interesting because what it's saying is, don't keep on stealing. In the Greek language, it literally reads, don't keep on stealing. Verse 27, where it says, neither give place to the devil, says, stop giving place to the devil, assuming that you have been up to now. Verse 28 says, stop stealing. And what it literally says is, that person, it uses a neutral pronoun, the one who is now stealing, let him stop, is what it literally says in the Greek. The one who is now stealing, let him stop. What is stealing? You ever stop and think about that? What is stealing? Well, if you break into somebody's house and take their flat screen TV, that's stealing. But I'm thinking more subtly than that. What is stealing? When the Bible refers to stealing, and it refers to stealing a lot, all through the whole Bible, the kind of stealing that God really judges is the stealing you get away with. Have you ever stolen something and gotten away with it? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Oh man, that's a good feeling. Whoa, for a little while, particularly if you're spiritually immature or if you're not saved. There are a lot of people who steal this, that, and the other thing. They might even steal an idea. They might steal prestige. They might steal something of a symbolic nature that belongs to somebody else. They might steal somebody else's glory. There are dozens of ways to steal that don't involve breaking in and taking a flat screen TV. Stealing is an attitude, and boy, once you've stolen, you really feel good. Man, I got that. What do we say if you make a really good bargain with a guy? That was a steal. I really got him, Right? Oh yeah, you feel good when you walk away. Tell me you don't. Haven't you ever made a deal that you just thought, man, that was like taking candy from a baby. Whoa, I should give this back. I really should give this back. No, I don't think I will. I think I'll keep it. Right? You know it's right. And you know what's inside of you. It's just in the human nature to make a good deal. Get the other guy, right? So when Paul writes in verse 28, the one, neuter pronoun in the Greek, meaning could be male or female, the one who is now stealing, let that one stop stealing. But rather, let him labor. It says the King James, but it's actually a neuter pronoun all the way through here. It could refer to male or female. And what's Paul saying here? Is he saying, don't break into your neighbor's house and steal his flat screen TV? No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, the attitude of stealing, which is basically getting the better of your neighbor, being on top, taking the advantage, wheeling and dealing at somebody else's expense. And notice what he contrasts it with. Rather, let him labor, working with his hands, the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. He's contrasting the attitude of stealing with the attitude of giving. If you have so learned Christ, that basic human attitude of stealing is replaced with a spiritual attitude of giving. What does a little baby do? A 2-year-old baby says, as it grabs a rubber ducky, it says, "Mine," right? "Mine." You ever see 2 little kids play? "Mine." "No, mine." And as you grow up, you learn that not everything is yours. And in fact, it's better to give than to receive. Well, wow, how revolutionary. Stealing is kind of an attitude. It's part of that putting on the new man. The new man is a giving man. That's what Paul's saying. The new man is a truthing man. The new man is righteously angry but controlled. The new man is not a taker, he's a giver. And the new man, verse 29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. The word for corrupt there is sapros in the Greek, which means rotten. Like if you got a piece of fruit, that's just bleh, one of those pieces of fruit you don't want to touch, is sapros in the Greek. Rotten, worn out, unfit for use, sapros. Let none of that communication proceed out of your mouth. We have a way of saying it these days is talking trash, right? That's one way that people communicate these days. Street lingo is designed for what? It's designed to dominate, to show power, to take control of a situation. Street language in the office is designed to control, to take power. There's a whole linguistic approach that's based upon the idea of dominance, dominating someone else linguistically. It is from here on down, from the top down, this kind of corrupt communication needs to be thrown away. It's rotten. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying. So, somebody walks up to you, are you going to try to dominate him or are you going to try to edify him? Are you going to try to minister grace, as it says here? But that which is good to the use of edifying, which is building up, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. So, from Paul's perspective, corrupt communication is not cussing or using dirty words, although he doesn't recommend that. But for him, corrupt communication is communication that tears people down instead of building them up. It does not minister grace to the hearer. Boy, the whole idea of putting on a new man, a lot of responsibility in that. Because essentially, the new man is Christ. And when you put on the new man, you're becoming more and more Christ-like. Well, we've had something to think about this morning. I've convicted myself. I realize that I need to put on much more of the new man than I already have. I'm definitely convinced, and I hope you are. The beauty of this kind of exhortation in the light of what God has done for us is that it kind of reminds us that we're all together in this thing. We're building each other up, and we now have the means to do it through Christ.